again? Okay. Hi, I'm Patricia Beaman, and I'll be interviewing choreographer Tere today.
And I am Tere O'Connor. Hello.
So, Tere, let's talk about your piece, Long Run, which was made in 2017 and premiered at Bard.
Yep.
And now it's going to be at Skirball.
Yes, this is our New York premiere.
So, I viewed the piece, 8 dancers, no set, and you did the score this time.
I did the score, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm always fascinated. I've seen many of your pieces where you've done the score. You've also worked with James Baker.
James Baker for
Jim Baker
most of my pieces, yeah. Jim Baker.
I'd like to ask you, just to jump into the piece, why were you the score maker this time, solely?
Okay. I think just a little history before that, which is important, is that when I first started making choreography as a very young person who didn't know anything about anything, I was enwrapped about dance. At the same time, I was already critical pretty quickly. And I felt that making a work to a piece of music, I just could not figure out why anyone would make a painting to a book or a book to a movie. I felt like I wanted to make choreography the protagonist of my work and not be in a secondary place of I think it's a decorative art to make a dance to music. It's a different art from what I'm doing. I'm unearthing something. And I'm also making music, but the music that I'm making by doing this has a kind of arc. It could be music that is metered and refers to the history of metered music in dance, or it could be music that refers to film scores or to the Oneiric realm, or to many other things, and I shift in and out of those things in I know it's kind of a cliche thing to say, but in a layered way. I do really think that choreography is a multivalent system that really affords layers very well, and I try to work with them very deeply. So the reason I wanted to do the music this time was to kind of be very exacting about the referential realm, because it's a referential thing to go from the different styles that I use all the time and that James and I have used over time. They have reference in them. And we come to an agreement on what that's going to be together when he's making the music. And I just wanted to take one journey by myself and see what that's like, because when we make the work, we make the pieces completely finished in silence, and then the music comes in.
That's what I want.
So I am already making this recipe of, dance that's danced to beat or not, or these things. It's going through these different modalities, and that's a big part of the choreography for me, is a shifting kind of forms of presentation. That's kind of the kinetic realm for me. Moving from one to the other. The movement is almost like a kind of, Trojan horse that brings this other kind of kinetics in the lower layers of things for me.
Right.
And that is finalized in the music. So.
I spoke with Silas Reiner.
Yeah, one of the dancers.
Your dancers.
He's been dancing with me for 5 years.
Right. And he was talking about, he worked with you for 2 weeks?
Yeah, we worked by ourselves for 2 weeks to make it.
And he was describing that when the rhythm is at the bottom of everything, in his opinion. And that when you make a phrase, it can be linear, but then you take it apart and then you insert something else. But for him, one of the challenging and really enthralling things for him is that the syntax of something will stay the same, but that the rhythmic accents will change.
Yeah, this is what this whole piece is kind of based on. One of the layers is that I made this piece with Silas. This phrase with Silas. And one of the things that I'm working with, not trying to prove or even make a statement about, but I want to really get into the room with this idea that the images in a dance are secondary to the kind of subterranean temporal effect that's going on. And what if I take that, and instead of theme and variation, I use the underneath musical grammar and reapply it. So we took it in different places and put completely different music on it. So these underpinnings of that thing are everywhere, but they don't just stay like that. They mutate, they grow, and all these kind of things. The rhythm, for me, rhythm is pretty much the closest you're going to get to voice in dance.
Right.
Because it can replicate the kind of lowest requirements of language, which are inflection and expression somehow. but without the common denotative elements that bring us together. So there's this other place I'm looking at. And I'm not saying like, dance speaks better than language at all. I love language. But I find language resituated in dance and doing something else. And I'm trying to kind of extract that and bring that to the fore in my choreographies.
Well, I think one of the things that I so appreciate about your work is that when I do go, I imbibe it rather than try to interpret it.
Thank you.
Okay. And I think that were I a critic, your work would be so hard to describe. And I think some of the things that I've read, in past interviews with you, is that you don't necessarily want it described.
I mean, I've had a contentious relationship with critics.
Yes.
Because a lot of them are not even trained to do this. Now there's a lot, I think, because of performance studies, I'm not just blowing smoke up the hallways, but, performance studies has brought in critical thinking.
Oh, yes.
Even to universities across the land. Whether people take it on or not, it's a new smell in dance departments.
Right.
And for me, it's just, I never, and this is the kind of queering, I think, I never was looking at the image of a dance. I remember going to see Swan Lake when I was really young. I went to Purchase, and Jacques D'Amboise was our, whatever you call that, dean for a while. And we had access to go watch and sit in that back booth behind, and I went all the time. And I was like, what? We don't have, where I grew up, I didn't have this. And I was amazed by it. But then I was like, these people are literally coming here to watch a story about a swan? I'm like, really? And then I started to see what else was going on and how the kind of the imagery is almost an insult or a subterfuge to say, like, don't look at the philosophy that's being brought here somehow. And I didn't know that. I know that in retrospect. Getting in the room and working, and I look at my practice as my writing, or my dances are the book. I'm literally doing the research inside the form as much as I can. So I got in there, and that kept showing up. Like, there is nothing about working with dance that says, use me to tell a story. It's like, no, there's no sense of about that dance can reach that is any interesting than any book I've read about the same subject. But because it has such kind of ambiguous contours, dance, it is very unnerving for humans. And they want there to be a kind of anchor of some sort. And that's, I think, where story comes into it over and over and over. Even now, like artists who are conceptual, and you're like, I have this concept, and then here it is in a dance. I'm like, well, I heard it in the concept already. But is the dance a translation of something, or is it its own kind of thing?
Right. But really, and I thank you for that, because, I look at Rothko, a painting by Rothko, and I don't look for meaning, or
if you're past modernism in any way, that's not what's going on, Although I think it is. I think there's a lot of people who still look at an abstraction as a kind of obfuscation of a story that's trying to ring out, as opposed to, a portal to transcendence of some sort, or a suggestion that we could go somewhere else, and consciousness is fuller than just the nomenclature, somehow.
A little bit about form, all right? Because as much as I try not to interpret things, I can't help it. And I just have to out myself. Like, I teach dance history, and I have seen images in your work, and I've told you about them. And I see La Bayadere sometime in a line, and you've laughed before, and not taking me to task on it or anything, but the trios in your work are really compelling to me. And maybe there's something about the golden mean, but in long run you have a beautiful one where one person is facing downstage and to 4 o'clock and whatever, 8 o'clock. And then I'm thinking about, and then there's a part that they come downstage and it's 3 women.
I don't know which one you're talking about.
Maybe I'm in Frozen Mommy now. But it's kind of like the witches from Macbeth. I can't.
Happened. That's happened before.
And it's sort of like 3 demonic, misbehaving 3 graces from Botticelli pops up. But the trio that I just love is from Poem, where the 3 men are on their back, and they're doing that the
The
legs
leg
up,
blossoms,
and
yeah.
you know, it's everything between June Taylor and
Mhm.
the kaleidoscope and all
Mhm.
this. So I always get, you know, these very strong images that are so poetic in your work. For me, the long run, I mean, I think there's the arc of your work has changed over the years.
Yeah, lots.
Lots, and I want to talk
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that with you, and why that is, and what you're thinking now. But I did want to say that an overarching theme that always is in your work for me is the relationship between people.
Oh, sure.
And, well, I mean, after all, you have bodies on stage, but, you know, this idea of people, you know, coming together, there's a cause and effect, something happens, it ripples through, something fractures, something else happens, and then all of a sudden we come back to it, and then it'll change again.
Mhm.
And, you know, that it reminds me of what you said about when you read a book, and new characters are introduced,
Mhm. Mhm.
and you start to wonder what's going to happen to the old characters. I had some moments of that in Long Run. You know,
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's going on is that I just want to answer a couple of things that
Yeah,
you're saying
sure.
just about in terms of history and how it's a reference in there. And I'm not even going to say the word post or anything, but postmodernism for me, I get it, but I never wanted it to be called that because it's just for me like English is a polyglot language.
Mhm.
And when you're talking, I say, hey, you know, that GH I think has a Germanic background. We're not pointing out all the parts, it's just there now, and that's the way I look at dance or moving. Like movement and dancing reside together without any question for me, and I'm not in a critique or in a place of appropriation or pastiche.
Mm.
It's not postmodern for me.
Mhm.
It's, I live now, and all that's happened.
Mm.
And I've studied all that, and sometimes I do, through the layers, I want to bring something that someone can hold on to before the ocean takes them under again, which to me brings language into the realm of consciousness, where language is not the president. So shards of things come up in your mind, and then you think about an essence, and you feel some pain, and then so the way that language resides inside of consciousness, or in my estimation of that, or it's seen through dance, is what I'm getting at.
Mhm.
So it does go in and out of reference,
Mhm. Okay.
but none of them is primary for me. It's the fact that everything has multiple meanings. So we get to the blossom legs, and I would say it does look like that. So we have to look at it, and I have to arrange it and really work at it so it can look like 40 things and be porous somehow, and not just that thing. So that's how I shape things a lot. When something comes up as super referential, sometimes I'll leave it there because it does make people kind of move forward, and I go again to the kinetics of the experience of watching it, in and out of moments of knowability of some sort or imagined,
Right.
which is really what you're projecting onto the whole world all the time. You know, you go into a room of people and make a whole
Can't get
bunch
rid of
of
it.
choices that
Yeah,
you don't
that's-
even know, and then you act from those.
Right.
So I'm looking at that. I'm just trying to look at that, the work, and I don't have an arrival point with that yet, but that's what the kind of like journey of my work has been, partially in dance, has been that.
Can I talk about your process, ask you about your process of how you make a phrase, and also your editing? Because I know that for some dances you decided to actually not edit, like the baby you spoke about.
Well, I
just-
started that way, but I didn't call it.
No,
I was
well.
afraid. I mean, the editing for me is the kind of the biggest drama of the work, is the choreographer who may be setting themselves into a kind of contentious relationship with time passing and trying to shape it somehow. And sometimes the more I look at the Rosetta Stone or something, or like kind of like religious art, it's so formal, and it's coming from a profound repression somehow, and something is being born out of it that I don't know if that's true or not, but I see that over and over and over again. But something for me about the effort to say, like, I'm going to have a beginning and end, and try to make time like somersault and be origami in front of you, because somehow that is difficult. Going there is difficult. And like the kind of more kind of surgical editing I've worked on has been an expression of that. I think the choreographer, just at the center of what's going on, is a kind of neuroses. and it's reflected in everyone. It's kind of like mortality. It's like, that's mortality here, you know? And I mean, that's not literal, but that's what, if I look for meaning in dance, or a kind of meaning production in dance, that's one of the basic things that I think is going on. And so I've chosen to move into this realm of artifice and kind of turn the vibe up on that fact via that kind of modality of something that's completely false, attempting to get to reality somehow.
Well, it feels very real.
Yeah, I think it's very visceral what I do.
It is, and it evokes all kinds of feelings. I mean, in long run, I got feelings of alienation. There's that point where everybody is prostrate on the floor except for two people, and there's that duet, and it's as if they're in some kind of apocalyptic landscape of alienation, and it's very despairing, and then it changes into something else. But always for me, how people come together and then go apart in your work, and also your way of arranging bodies in tight ways. You have a quintet that there are three people sort of in a triangle and two facing downstage, and they're all they're all in a little bit different facing, so it's almost like fractals coming off.
Very much,
or Fibonacci numbers, kind of, but they're all doing the same thing. But somehow, it's like looking at a diamond and all the facets. So, I so appreciate your craft and what you do, because I mean, obviously, I know that's a loaded word.
No, that's fine. I mean, I know you're not supposed to craft. I'm totally into craft. As I think design is a very spiritual kind of undertaking, it can be. I think one of the things that's coming from is that again, when I was really young, one of the things that I just started to kind of know or see or maybe project was that making these dances was like a hallucination of architecture.
Yes, okay.
Like everything you do suggests place, size, dimension, monolith, domesticity. So there's this language of changeability from place to place that really starts to be more important than any kind of image you could put out there that says it's a cat, now it's a toaster, now it's a person, like that, whatever. There's some other thing going on, and it has a democracy to it, because you say, like, I'm going to suggest corner, and each person is going to paint what corner that is. Or, the same way you turn your head, you see a light, and you have a memory of being somewhere in this Massachusetts. That kind of thing. I'm trying to really corral that concept into usage in my work somehow. I mean, whether or not that's a literal thing, but I am shaping constantly the size of what you're looking at, and facing all these things, like something, here's something that's an architecture that's designed by human, here's something that's designed by nature, here's something between them, here's something that, is coming from androids, another place, or digital kind of machinations that bring these things about, and they're always changing. And again, that's one of the subterranean messages that I think are much more important than the imagery in the work. And trying to learn how to arrange those has been kind of what I've been committed to really hard. So.
We can go back to long run, but I think this is a good jumping back point.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that really was kind of a hallmark of your earlier work was, and you had such a tight group of people for a long time. I mean, your dancers are extraordinary now too, but people are very loyal to you.
Yeah, definitely.
And you have had some really extraordinary
I've had the first people that were in my company were 13 years, Nancy and Krista and Sarah, and I love them.
Nancy, Krista, and Sarah. And then, but you've had several chapters, but vocalizing and speaking was such a big part.
For a moment,
Well, for more than a moment.
Yeah, for a little while,
So when do you decide if the voice is going to come into a piece, or does it just kind of happen in something in the studio and it's just fucking funny and you keep it? Because there's a lot of that sort of sardonic wit that comes out.
Yeah. I think mostly it was that when I started out, I was making these kind of abstract, kind of still theatrical works with the potentiality to kind of swarm and turn into vignettes and go in and out of that. And I was asking that question. I was going through a kind of like looking at it through a queer lens. I don't know if it was called that then, but I was saying, like, I mostly see what's underneath. I mostly see secreted messages. I mostly see these other things. And what if I just went to, and always through life people talk about political art, and I was like, I'm not sure what that really. But so I was thinking, like, why would you make a dance when you could put a banner up that says what you want to say, like fuck Trump or something? It doesn't need to exist in time. And so I was just trying to figure that out for myself. So I did Hi Everybody. I did like 4 dances that moved into like the kind of treatment of injustices at the front of the work. And I made Hi Everybody had like 23 injustices that I wrote into the work. But once it came out and was made, I then applied choreographic techniques to it to kind of like collage it and cut it apart and bring it into another kind of systemic look that was no longer language, but it went from language out. And then there's other things that really refer, again, totally to pop culture and to like, all kinds of different things. We used to have sections called Shakespeare and, in and out of these places, definitely of humor. And, so I wanted to look at that for a while, and I really wish there was another word than abstraction. That is such a loaded word.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever it is that I'm doing with dance, I wanted to test it, and I did for, I think about Frozen Mommy, Hi Everybody, Mother, and Baby to a certain degree. And then I kind of left that because I had looked at it, but its results are ghosted in the work I'm doing now, definitely. They still are resonating through somehow. So that's what I was looking at. And still I'm just I'm really in a place of like, I don't want any set, I don't want anything. It's just, I really want to keep looking at dance, even as everyone else has abrogated movement inside their work. Artistic movements are something I don't understand. I didn't become an artist to join a group of people. I became an artist to individuate. I know that's kind of old-fashioned, but when a group of people does something, I really run from it. Or I just have to I really have to scrutinize it. Because it's like, why would you, it's like, like religion or monogamy, all these monos that people join in and standardize their behavior. Dance is at odds with that at a center in my belief system. So I can't, so I use it in those, looking in those methodologies.
Well, that's something that's remained constant because you never danced really with anybody.
No, I had a beautiful, amazing boyfriend when I started out. He was from Italy, and we both were. No, Enzo was his name. Enzo, yeah. We both were wanted to make work. From the time I started dancing at Purchase, I knew I wanted to make work. I didn't for 5 years, but I knew I didn't want to dance with anyone. And particularly in those days, it was the 80s. There was people who danced with Trisha or Merce, and all the work looked like that. And I thought something else was coming out of my body. I didn't want to get referential. I mean, I loved all that stuff. I wasn't against it. But I wanted to kind of locate a voice that was just kind of coming out of me. And for me, it was absolutely from a profoundly closeted experience. That I was just, this other thing had been creating itself as I played another part for the first 20 years of my life. Something else was being formulated, and I'm happy about it ultimately. It gave me a whole different kind of point of view on things. But yeah, so I didn't dance with anyone. I didn't want to have anyone's thing on my body. And I also felt far from, I'm totally into music, but music before, dancing to music is like, there's the structure. I don't want to make that. I don't want to do that. And that seemed to be like the prevailing, partially in certain arenas of work. That's what was going on. So I just had to look at my own thing. So.
Right, and then the exaltation of the body as that was something that was
anathema to you. Yeah, that I quickly came up with. I think the thing that's been very important in there's 2 words that are really important to me: problematizing. As opposed to people who, find their heroism as an avant-gardist by cutting off all of history, that seems odd to me. And I feel like ballet, which is a hideous form to certain degrees, and beautiful, I'm dragging it up a hill on a rope with rocks attached to it in my work. It has a range of things that it can be. It's not only, man, those fucking white people, it is that. It is that very much. But I'm trying to, again, bring that into multiplication, not reduction. Mm-hmm. Everything, being gay, being overweight, dealing with my weight, all of these things, they are all find a kind of location in the work. Mm-hmm. not a kind of negation. That's something that was also very hard for me when Judson was around. I was like, why would I say no to all the amazing films I'm seeing? And there can be someone who's virtuosic right next to someone who's doing like a Bresson treatment of acting, and that's really interesting to have that contrast. I really didn't understand the no, and I thought it was very self-congratulatory.
Well,
So.
later on, Yvonne says no to spell.
I know. I mean, and I
whatever
love those
that
people.
meant.
They were very important. But when I was at that age, I was like, I don't no manifesto. Who do we think we are? I don't need a manifesto. I'm just working, you know. So that kind of stuff was difficult for me. And I remember telling my boyfriend that he lived in Rome and we lived in Rome. And I told him at one point, I said, I don't think that Judson's so big for me. It was like, he looked at me like, and I said, I think it's very important. But all art forms go through that rejection. It's,
But what you came up with was even more brilliant.
Well, whatever. It was the Hudson
movement.
The Hudson movement. Just a couple of
Right?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Cunningham.
left a message I think is very interesting
Right.
of just complete openness, complete openness, no even taste. The way that he would have people costume his works. You'd have some, I don't know, do you know this Australian kind of word called dag?
No.
Dag is like a person in high school who's like, doesn't have the right clothes or anything, but they're still cool enough to hang out, but they're like a dag. But he'd have like a dag do his costumes and just not worry about it. He's like, here's the work. It was the first audience move having collaborators, like just put on it what you will. And it's still the same, if you have a baby on the thing, you throw one blanket on it and another one, it's going to still do the same movement, And he just proposes this complete open flight into the next moment, that wasn't about self-congratulatory modalities or even authorship. It was more about, this other thing. I could go on for hours.
Well, can we just jump to Silas for a second?
Sure.
On that segue?
Yeah.
Because he came out of 2 years with the Goodbye tour.
Absolutely.
And then when it ended on New Year's Eve, right?
Mm-hmm.
You called it January 2nd?
Annette. Like the dog catcher.
So, he obviously had drunk the Cunningham elixir and so well and so beautifully. So is it, when you work with him, and all your dancers are extraordinary, is there something about that Cunningham logic that makes it really easy to work with him and changing those rhythms or the kind of...
That's sure. But I think the thing about any of the dancers I work with, and Silas included, is the dancers' kind of ownership of their role. I don't work with people, and I've been so lucky to have people that are in that parental relationship with choreographers, which is pretty anachronistic, but still, it's a part of the psychology. And I can see it a mile away. So people who are like, we're doing the same thing, I'm in a different place with you. I am very clear to say, people, I am looking for something. I don't come in here like a master who's going to make you understand and make it. Mm-hmm. I am coming in here looking for it. You're a big part of that. Mm-hmm. I'm super detailed and complicated. Can you get into a journey like that? Because it's going to be it's going to be like that, And Hillary Clark invented what they call the funeral. Like when I would cut off 40 minutes of movement, she'd be like, just a minute. I started ting with a teardrop. They'd go up into the corner and they'd do a mime of taking breaks. It's very funny. Because I do cut a lot of material. I've really, almost in a homeopathic way, I try to take elements that I see in dance, like ongoingness, forward movement, and use those as editing tools.
Yeah.
So the idea of saving material is kind of more like sculpture or something. Like you're trying to make an object out of it. And I feel like if you just kind of keep climbing forward, that stuff will find its presence in another way in what you've been making. But I don't like to hold on to movements, so they have to go through a lot of creating really detailed things, and then that gets cut off and falls into the ocean.
So every day you rehearse 4 hours a day, 5 hours a week, from what I understand.
5 days a week, yeah.
So
It's very intense. It's pretty intense. Poor things.
Well, poor you too.
Well, but that's the thing is this is what I want to do on Earth. Are you guys into it? So people that are there are not being like, what does this end?
No,
it's not that kind of people. They're artists.
No.
So that's what I think what facilitates a lot of it. I'm totally blessed with amazing people, and the atmosphere is, I just I think of someone like Mike Lee. I'm not comparing myself in any way to Mike Lee, but like a director who just has a group of people.
Yeah.
Sometimes the woman who was the cashier in the last film is the lead in the next
Right.
one. But they're all on board, you know, for the trip, you know, for the kind of aesthetic. So.
Oh, I think it's a great analogy.
Yeah, no, it
No.
feels like that always helped me kind of think of it that way, because I don't necessarily love having strangers in the work, just because I don't know, and I don't love doing commissioned works because, you know, people don't know they're coming from a different place. It just takes a really long time to connect, and a lot of them are like eye roll. There's a lot of eye rollage and furrowed brow in my life. In other places, you know, well, that's how it is, but.
So do you plan to do with your schedule, because you're in Champaign-Urbana teaching half the year, is it sort of your want to do a new piece every fall? Is that how do you get going?
Can you put an overlay of eyes spinning?
Oh, I know you don't do one every fall, but.
No, I do.
You do? Alright, so you do.
I have been. I'm going to not do that coming up. Right next year, I'm going to do a project. I don't know if I'm allowed to say where, because I know where, but I don't think I'm allowed to
You
say.
don't
Somewhere
have to
near
say.
city. And it's going to be like a research project for a piece that I will then do the year after.
Oh, interesting.
Because one of the things I'm looking at right now is the kind of cultural weather that I'm in, and I'm like, wow, this is super different from what I came up in. And there's a lot of, you know, basically race and gender are just knocking at the door and cannot be left out. However, I don't feel like I can generate the work about that. People have to be invited in. So I'm thinking about bringing some people in to have a discussion / rehearsal / end up in a piece that I also am going to kind of overlay a kind of really formal work with Ravel's music. That it'll keep churning in and out of that somehow. That's what I'm starting with, the idea.
Okay.
But somehow I just want to take some. I'm at a place where I'm like, you know, it is an anomaly to some degree to work the way that I work with you know, like what could be called formalism. I would call them other things, but that's what people see as. And inside of the culture right now, if things are resonating in another way with me, I work with grad students a lot, you know, and they just have really interesting stuff that's going on, and some of it is at odds with what my experience has been. So I just feel like I want to open up and look a different way. So I've been blessed. I have an amazing life in terms of working, because my time off, thank you, University of Illinois, it's basically a research moment. It's shaped on like what a scientist would have in a tier 1 research university, and it's amazing. So I'm going to use it for research this time.
Good.
And then come back and I'll make pieces. I've made more than 45 pieces, you know, and it's like, okay, what's next? You go to the room and you're like, how about let's do something about parsley? And we touched on herbs, you know. It's like holy shit. So I want to just like have a listening kind of playing around.
Yeah, that's a great thing about teaching, isn't it? That
Yeah.
You always get new ideas coming up.
Well, it always has been. I've been teaching since I was really young, and the kind of, I don't know, up in Rochester we used to say getting our face cracked, where someone says something to you that just like completely undoes your trip. Face crackage is called. And I get my face cracked all the time, because people will just say something, be like, you know, raise your hand and say something, you're like, you're trying to disintegrate everything I built in my life. No, and I'm open to it. I like it, because you have to come to terms with this, and somehow in my work, I think there's a lot of conflict, and I'm not looking for it to be resolved. I'm looking at the kind of music of the relativity of this constellation of different things.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm looking at, not a resolution for them, but how do they kind of ricochet against each other, and what kind of like psychic sound comes out of that somehow.
All the same, the political climate right now, I'm
Yeah.
just wondering, because in some of the Skirball promo info, it says that the dancers at the end are trying to find calm. And I wonder how much of that sort of, like, you also said that your work is an abstraction documenting the time you're living in now.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But it's not making pictures of that.
No.
Yeah.
But it's feeling, right?
Definitely, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's definitely reacting to. It reacts to the moment, like from dynamic places. You know, definitely. Not in any explanatory modalities, but from definitely, I'm taking in I mean, there's so much contrast of elements in this piece that is coming from that kind of like just having your head kind of rearranged by the disbelief of what's going on. But not only, I mean, I do believe that you absorb these things and the dancers' bodies absorb them. So it's a mixture of like what the dancers are going through. I try to really include who's in the room in the work. That's a big part of creating a little country every time. It's like a little culture every time. And the kind of like shaking of the earth, what's going on, politically is definitely hugely important. But if I were to want to make a statement about that, I would get on the news and try to say something about it. I don't look at my work as a kind of place for proclamation.
Right. But the self-soothingness is, I think, something that I'm doing a lot these days.
Yeah.
And the beautiful sort of undulation of the bodies at the end,
Mm-hmm.
and also the lighting.
Lighting, yeah.
It's almost like the Northern Lights.
Yeah,
How that comes
Michael
in.
O'Connor
It's
is
very
really wonderful. Yeah.
exquisite.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Spoiler alert! No,
but it.
it's not that literal.
But there is that feeling that, I don't know, it's just, we won't talk about the ending too much, but I think, can we go back to a little bit about, the fact that you are, your queerness, you're gay, and you talked about how hard that was, and I have a friend that just said, every day I wake up, this was back in the 80s,
Oh yeah.
and I put my feet on the floor and I wish I weren't gay.
Oh, absolutely.
And
I grew up in a very small rural kind of place. Yeah.
And like you say, it's gotten so much easier.
Yeah, definitely.
Doors have opened, and I wanted to just the Marxist critic Walter Benjamin, he wrote that there's no document of civilization which is not at the same time a document of barbarism.
Yeah.
And I just am looking at Coverboy. What year was Coverboy?
2009.
9, okay. And then Undersweet.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of, Undersweet is very sexy,
Mm-hmm.
it's sensual, it's, the eroticism is so easily accessed.
Mm-hmm.
And Coverboy had so many violent images. I remember the throat, and I was front and center in that concert, and it was terrifying.
Yeah,
and
it's a
so I'm wondering, is that sort of like a side A, side B, or not that one is less than more, but I don't know.
No, I think there are some points where I just willfully move towards content.
Okay.
And that I want to like just test it, what it does if I bring, 13% content into the work.
So
It
that's
doesn't necessarily-
Undersweet?
Both of them. They're both about
There are bets.
gayness
Yeah.
through a queer lens
Yeah.
somehow. But the queerness moves into otherness and a lot of alternative kind of shapings and patterning that are just as much about a kind of different stance than the representation of the gayness is somehow. So those two things kind of mix together. And in a time that's really, I made those works in a time that they can no longer be about protest, in the kind of places where I show my work. It's obviously a limited group of people that are pretty much enlightened, there's not a lot of anti-gay people in the theaters we show our work in. So it's not necessarily for that, it's just about allowing these kind of other views of love to just kind of be present for a minute, because I think there's something really amazing that the gay world can offer people about a much kind of selfless, more open love. And I kind of, some of its tenets are also reside inside of my kind of structuring capability somehow. That there's not just one place. There's many, and tangent, for example, coming to something and moving somewhere else is really something valuable to have.
I was curious though, also, it's the first time I've ever heard you use Louis Artiste.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Very Louis XIV's favorite.
Oh, that's right. Of
opera.
course. Yeah. And you were in.
I
Didn't Ria
danced in
Nasserie
it.
did it, right? Did you see the original?
Les Afloissants. Yeah, Ria
But then Ria
Nasserie.
Nasserie. But then they did another
Yeah.
one that was incredible at BAM. Did you see that
Yeah,
one?
yeah.
Oh
yeah.
my God, that
Yeah.
was the best one.
Oh,
No, it's
yeah.
my favorite music
That's
like
opera.
ever.
Opera has has to be done.
Yeah,
with
it
that
was
project.
shocking, yeah.
But yes, you used Lee,
Yeah, definitely,
who actually was preferred the company of men, but was married to
I
women.
would say so,
and,
yeah,
you
I
know.
would say so, Lee, yeah. No, definitely, well, that music has, that's what I find in it, it's like, it was wearing the kind of, mechanistic kind of compositional tools of the time, but its essence is really flying in another place, you know. It's very transcendent, that music for me. I love it. I really love it. Especially the somnambulate, the kind of sleep.
The
that
sleep,
one, yeah,
yes.
it's incredible. Yeah, so I was really saying that's the only time I've ever used, very few times have I ever referred to music, but I really wanted to pull that forward, you know.
I thought it worked incredibly well.
Yeah,
Of course,
I
you
think it's
didn't.
kind of,
But it wasn't
no,
on the beat.
it's
but
flying by on clouds,
yeah,
you know, yeah.
Yeah,
But,
yeah, Chariot.
yeah,
Deus Ex
it
Machina.
was nice. I mean, I'm thinking about ultimately, I might get to a place where I go to music and use a score in my life. You know, all these any kind of adamancy, and I see it in others, I have to recommend. So anytime you have like an adamancy about your work, you usually should question it. Like, arriving at a certitude is what art should kind of undo.
Yeah.
So when I arrive at them myself, I'm like, yeah, don't be so hard about that, because who knows? You know, like Trisha Brown ended up doing operas,
Yes.
and they were pretty amazing. She got that experience. So I try to, when I get to these statements, I'm like, yeah, no, 21-year-old Terry. Let's
I
look
think
at it in a
that's
different way.
really-
Who knows what will happen? I don't know.
Well, you know what? That's why you'll never
We'll
get
see.
stuck.
I did once. I did a commission for this company. What was it called? Blanc. What's everything for Carte Blanche in Bergen, Norway. And I was like, I want to see this, so I did the Kindertotenlieder of Mahler, and I really studied the score, and it was really snowing, and you go up the funicular to the top of the mountain, there was snow, and I'd like clear a place away, kind of like Mahler might have, and read the score, and poured over the score. It was pretty amazing. The piece was not that great, but it was interesting.
So
to do
you're
that.
you're a trained musician.
I know how to read music. I'm not a
Yeah.
trained. I can't play, but I know how to read music.
Okay.
I mean, I do play on some of. I play the piano
Oh yes,
on
you
this
do.
piece.
You did play.
Like-
Is that you singing too?
No, it's not me singing.
I wanted to ask you about family.
Family? Yeah.
Family. You come from a big family?
I do.
A lot of your titles have
Oh yeah.
women's names or
Very much so.
family,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
Greta in the Ditch.
Mother,
and
sister.
Frozen Mommy
Yeah.
and Mother, Sister,
Yeah.
Baby.
Yeah.
So, is that...
I do think that's a huge thing. I think that's like a kind of some kind of palace that everything comes from. I mean, definitely the mother and baby. I did a piece called Boy, Boy, Giant Baby that was in 1985 that kind of was generated from a dream I had when I was in high school that completely changed me, where I somehow birthed a baby from my body in the dream. You know, it wasn't graphic or anything, but, and then I had this baby and I woke up, I was really depressed for like 4 days, and I couldn't express it to my mother and anything, and I was like, this is the end of the world for me, because there wasn't enough language about gender nonconformity. I think there was something like that going on for me, but something about the inability to have a baby made me feel like terrible. Like I'm not worth anything or something like that went on.
Wow.
And I kind of like, the mother thing, the presence of mother and what it does on earth, it was a portal for me into a lot of my work, somehow. I don't remain there, or it doesn't move into these explanatory places, except Mother did. I don't know if you saw Mother, the piece that was about, where they imitated their own mothers.
Yeah.
But in general, there's just this kind of like pillars of starting points, like, you know, through which I weave most of my thinking to then exit it and move into the dance kind of thinking. So, yeah, they are repeated all the time.
Yeah.
Sister.
It's interesting. What did your mother think of your dancing?
Oh, she's passed away, but it was very much like over there. She was very supportive. My father never saw it because he was, you know, one of those stone fathers. But my mother came and, you know, usually I had to come to terms with her outfit because she'd be like, you know, what should I wear? Something casual or something? I'm like, what are the options? She'd come look like with a Peter Pan thing with a velvet cameo over it. I'm like, Is that cash because the jeans are coming below your tits? Like, where were you on? Anyway, she was supportive. She was supportive after a while, you know.
She ever do costumes for your kids?
Oh, I should never do them actually. Have you seen the last Gucci, the Gucci line that just came? Have you seen Gucci?
No.
No, it's amazing. You should look at it. The 1819 Gucci is something shocking. It's
really?
beautiful. It's really beautiful and crazy, really crazy. I show my students sometimes fashion runway because it's a really interesting direct relationship. Like, what do you think this person thinks is making this into a collection? And it's like a dance. It just comes at you, and you're like, is it color? Is it shape? Is it thought? Is it reference? Is it this? And it's really interesting, especially with some of the more kind of like outer-reaching people. To look, it's beautiful. The thinking behind it. I mean, I have really problems with the luxury of fashion and stuff, but there's something in it that tells me a lot. I look at it all the time.
Yeah. Well, that's
very interesting.
That's creativity.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Some of these
That's
people, like the way that they.
On a conveyor belt.
Yeah. Or I remember Matthew Barney's show at the. At the Guggenheim, and all these secondary products that came out of the thinking. I was like, that's so interesting to me. Like, if you turned the Guggenheim and spun, even more products would fly out of it, you know. And the same thing with the conveyor belt, and this kind of like, oh, is it brown? Oh, no, it's rectangles now. It's circles and rectangles. This kind of additive quality that doesn't accumulate like narrative does. It's doing something else, and it's just a really good place to kind of look at it.
So, let's see. Brian McDivitt.
Brian McDevitt, yeah. Brian
James
and I
Baker.
went to school with both of them. They worked with me for years. And then Brian just became, you know, he was very big on Broadway. He's won 5 Tonys, and he's still my best friend. But he couldn't always work anymore because he would have these big
Lighting.
things.
Yes.
Yeah. And we worked with Michael O'Connor, who was his assistant, who I've been working with for 10 years now since Brian has not been around. He's, you know, just as great, you know.
And the Gesamtkunstwerk, when you come
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
do you always have the piece done, or do they come in?
With Jimmy,
It's very
it's usually
process.
that I'm usually pretty much done, almost completely finished. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we talk about like what kind of elements might be in there. He goes and makes a lot of material, and then I get together with him for like 2 weeks, and we kind of bring it together, and we create like parallel lives for the dance and the music. Like, when will they be kind of like amiable, and when will they be apart? What kind of effect does that relationship have on the viewer? You know, when is it referring to dancing, to music? When is it referring to something else? And it's late nights, and he is very exacting. I mean, he is a percussionist for the New York City Ballet.
Right.
He is a conductor for Talia, which is like the kind of cutting edge new music ensemble. He also conducts for like original Baroque. I mean, he's
That's
like
how
got
I know.
a huge mind.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we get together, he can make anything happen. So, and we'll work together again, definitely. So. But yeah, I mean, again, I've been blessed with this group of people around me who are just on board for the vibe of it, and it's been, you know, really very fulfilling. You know,
Well, I think they're blessed by you too.
well, you know, I think it's shared
It's shared love.
shared love.